You believed in love. You threw yourself into it. You loved like it was your life's mission. With fire, with purity, with everything you had. And still, it wasn't enough. Every time, it ends the same. They leave. Or worse, they stay just long enough to hollow you out. You blame yourself. Maybe you were too much, too intense, too honest about what you needed. But here's the truth most people won't tell you. Love doesn't break everyone equally. It breaks you, because you actually feel it, because you believed the story. But what if that story was never written for your happiness? What if love itself, the way we're taught to chase it, is the trap? There's a certain kind of person who experiences love like a storm, but not the kind that destroys. The kind that awakens. They don't fall in love halfway. They don't wait for the right moment. They don't hold back in fear of being hurt, even though they usually are. These are the romantics, the idealists, the empaths, the people who believe, often quietly, that love still has the power to heal something broken in the world. To the romantic, love isn't just a feeling. It's a belief system. It's the place they go to feel seen, to feel known, to feel safe. They see potential in people. They listen deeply. They remember the little things. They hope, sometimes more than they should. And when they meet someone who sparks even the faintest echo of connection, they show up fully, genuinely, and without calculation. But the world doesn't always know what to do with that kind of honesty, because most people are not used to being loved that way. They're used to the version of love that's transactional, cautious, and easily discarded. So when the romantic offers something real without games, without manipulation, it can be overwhelming. It can be too much for someone who's never had to look in the mirror and ask themselves if they're ready to be loved with that level of intensity and care. This is where things start to unravel. At first, it feels mutual. There are hours of conversation. There's closeness, promises, inside jokes, maybe even shared plans for the future. The romantic believes they've finally found someone who sees them, someone who gets it. But slowly, reality begins to shift. The effort becomes one-sided. The emotional availability that once felt endless now feels limited, like the other person is backing away from something they asked for. So what does the romantic do? They stay. They love harder. They try to be more patient, more understanding, more flexible. Not because they're weak, but because that's what love means to them, showing up even when it's difficult. Giving people the benefit of the doubt. Holding space. Waiting it out. But eventually, the imbalance becomes undeniable. The texts don't feel the same. The presence becomes inconsistent. And worst of all, the romantic begins to shrink. They stop bringing up their needs. They suppress their emotions. They edit themselves in real time just to avoid pushing the other person further away. And that silence, that slow fading out, is what breaks them. Because it's not just the loss of the person, it's the slow erosion of their hope. It's the realization that no matter how purely they loved, it still wasn't enough to make the story last. At that point, they start to question everything. Was I too much? Did I scare them away? Was I wrong to be so open? And this is the real heartbreak. Not just that the relationship ended, but that it ended again. That this pattern keeps repeating. That every time they lead with love, they're met with indifference. And they can't understand why it keeps happening. But here's the uncomfortable truth. People who love deeply, who feel the world in high definition, often suffer more in relationships, not because there's something wrong with them, but because they're wired for depth in a world that often rewards shallowness. They want connection, while most are still trying to keep their options open. They value loyalty, while others chase novelty. They want to build something real, and they keep ending up in places that were only meant to be temporary. And the cruelest part is that they're rarely the ones who walk away. They're the ones left with unanswered questions, open wounds, and the burden of memory. Because even when it's over, they still remember. They still care. So they ask, over and over, why do the most loving people seem to suffer the most in love? Why is it that the ones who give everything always end up feeling like they have nothing left? And maybe the more haunting question is this: How many more times can they give their heart before they stop believing that love is worth it at all? When love breaks you enough times, you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" And you start asking, "What is this thing I keep chasing? Why does it keep hurting me?" That's when some people stumble across a name they've never heard before: Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer wasn't the type of philosopher who tried to make the world sound nicer than it is. He didn't tell you to be positive or to manifest your soulmate or to heal your inner child and try again. He looked straight at the human condition and said, "This is suffering, and we're all tangled in it." To understand why love so often leads to pain, Schopenhauer believed we had to look past the surface, past emotions, past promises, past fairy tales, and ask, what is actually driving all of this? What's behind the need to connect, to desire, to attach? His answer was simple but chilling: the will. He described the will as the underlying force behind all life, not just human life, but everything that exists. It's not a thinking force. It doesn't care about morality, kindness, or even your happiness. It just wants, endlessly. It wants existence to continue. It wants energy to keep moving. It wants life to repeat itself again and again. Everything we do, our ambitions, our cravings, our relationships, is, in his view, just the will acting through us. We think we're making conscious choices, but most of the time we're not. We're reacting to instincts shaped by a force that existed long before us and will continue long after. And when it comes to love, the illusion runs the deepest. We like to think love is about intimacy, about connection, about finding someone who completes us. But Schopenhauer saw that as a carefully disguised mechanism of nature. Romantic love, he said, is one of the strongest manipulations of the will. It binds people together, not because they're compatible in spirit, but because, on some primal level, their union might produce desirable offspring. That's it. That's the trick. Nature doesn't care if you're fulfilled, cares that you reproduce. And so we fall in love not freely, but compulsively, with urgency, with need, with obsession. We chase people who awaken something in us, something we can't explain. We tell ourselves this person is special when what's really happening, Schopenhauer would argue, is that the will has found a target. You don't desire them by chance. You desire them because your biology sees in them something it wants to continue through. But desire is a trap, because once the will gets what it wants, once the chase ends, or the relationship stabilizes, or the excitement dies down, the illusion begins to unravel. You start to feel the emptiness creeping in. The person you once obsessed over feels ordinary, or they pull away, or you pull away, and you don't understand why something that once felt so alive now feels so hollow. Schopenhauer would say that this isn't a failure. It's the system working exactly as it was designed. Love hooks you with longing. It keeps you moving. And once that movement has served its purpose, once the biological agenda is fulfilled or abandoned, it withdraws the feeling, leaving you with confusion, grief, and an ache that never seems to make sense. And here's the hardest part: the more deeply you feel, the more romantic you are, the more this process will wound you. Because you aren't playing love like a game. You're offering your soul. You're surrendering to the illusion with full belief. And that's why it hurts more when it falls apart. Because it meant more to you. But to the will, you're just a vessel. You're moved around like a piece on a board. And when you break, when your heart shatters under the weight of another failed connection, the will doesn't pause. It just moves on to the next craving, the next longing, the next spark. So if you've ever felt like love was using you, if you've ever wondered why the more you care, the more you bleed, Schopenhauer would say, it's not your imagination. You are being used, not by the person necessarily, but by life itself, by a force that doesn't care about your peace, only your pursuit. And until you see that clearly, the pain won't stop, because you'll keep mistaking the pull of desire for the promise of happiness, and you'll keep paying the price with pieces of yourself. By now, it starts to make more sense. why love hurts you more than it seems to hurt others, why you keep pouring your heart into people and walking away emptier than when you began. It's not that you love wrong. It's that you love deeply in a world that doesn't know what to do with depth. You're not just chasing affection. You're searching for meaning, for something whole, for something that silences that ache inside you, the one that says, there must be more than this. And when you find someone who makes the noise stop, even for a moment, it feels like salvation. But the moment you ask love to complete you, it turns against you. Not because you're doing it wrong, but because you're trying to use love to fix a wound it was never designed to heal. Schopenhauer saw this clearly. He believed that as long as we're attached to people, to outcomes, to the illusions we build in our heads, we will suffer. Because nothing lasts. No person stays the same. No relationship stays perfect. And when you build your peace on something so fragile, it crumbles the moment reality no longer matches your expectations. Romantics suffer more because they don't just love, they idealize. They see the best in others, even when it's not there. They cling to moments of connection as proof that something divine is unfolding. They interpret chemistry as destiny. And that kind of thinking creates a dangerous gap between who someone is and who you hope they are. Eventually, that gap becomes too wide to ignore. And you start to feel betrayed not just by the person, but by yourself. By your own ability to believe so fully in a story that was never real to begin with. But Schopenhauer wouldn't call that weakness. In fact, he'd say it's the opposite. That pain? That heartbreak? That unbearable loneliness you carry after love slips through your fingers again? It's not a flaw. It's a sign that you're awake. That you see the world for what it really is, imperfect, impermanent, indifferent, and you still choose to feel. That you were brave enough to risk meaning in a place where meaning keeps disappearing. Most people stay asleep. They numb themselves with distractions, cycles of shallow relationships, the next thrill, the next fix. They avoid the void by keeping busy. But the romantic walks straight into it, thinking they'll find something beautiful there. And when it doesn't work, they don't just hurt, they question everything. They feel betrayed by life itself. Because they didn't just want love, they wanted it to make sense of things. But love, when tied to the will, isn't interested in making sense. It's a trick of nature, a pull without peace. And the more you expect it to save you, the more it will break you. So what's the alternative? Schopenhauer's answer was painful, but strangely freeing. Stop chasing what you think will complete you. Stop trying to fill the spiritual void with human connection. That's not where peace lives. Peace, he said, begins where attachment ends. Not in isolation or coldness, but in clarity. In learning to witness desire without obeying it. In finding contentment not in what you grasp, but in what you can let go of. And maybe that's the strange gift buried inside all this pain. If you can learn to stop expecting love to save you, you might finally learn how to live without needing to be saved. There comes a point in the romantic's journey when something breaks, not the heart this time, but the illusion. After enough disappointments, enough cycles of intense connection followed by slow emotional death, you begin to realize that your pain isn't just about who left you or who didn't choose you or who didn't see you clearly enough. It's about the way you love, or rather, what you expect love to do for you. You stop asking, why do they keep leaving, and start asking something far more honest, why do I keep needing so much? That's the beginning of what some might call a spiritual awakening. But not the kind that feels light or euphoric. This one feels like grief, because for the first time, you begin to see how much of your life has been spent chasing people. Not because they were right for you, but because you hoped they could quiet the chaos inside you. And that's when something in you starts to shift. You begin to imagine a different way of being, not less loving, but less dependent. Not emotionally numb, but emotionally balanced. A way of loving that isn't about completing yourself through another person, but about showing up fully without trying to possess anything. That's what intelligent detachment looks like. It's not cold. It's not cynical. It's love without addiction, presence without obsession, desire without collapse. You can want someone and still be whole without them. You can enjoy deep intimacy and still hold onto your inner center. You can feel the beauty of connection without turning it into a lifeline. This shift is quiet but profound, because it changes the entire foundation of how you move through the world. You're no longer building your identity on whether someone stays or texts back, or mirrors the intensity you offer. Instead, you're anchored in something else, something internal. A sense of self that doesn't evaporate when someone doesn't love you the way you hoped they would. And while Schopenhauer might not have used the same words, this idea echoes through his philosophy. He saw attachment as the root of suffering, not just romantic but existential. We crave things, people, outcomes, validation, and every time we get what we want, the satisfaction is brief. Then the hunger returns, because desire, left unchecked, is infinite. So what's the solution? Not to suppress desire entirely, but to see it clearly for what it is, a visitor, not a truth. A movement of energy, not a command to obey. When you stop building your life around the fulfillment of desire, a strange thing happens: your suffering begins to soften. That doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop confusing care with clinging. You begin to love people without needing to trap them in your story. You can enjoy a beautiful connection without demanding it lasts forever. You can sit in someone's presence, fully open, and still know that your peace isn't tied to their behavior. And this is freedom, not the lonely kind, the liberating kind. The romantic, in their purest form, doesn't need to be healed of love. They need to evolve within it. They need to stop looking at others as salvation and start becoming the source of their own calm. It's not easy, especially if your identity has been built on longing, on the chase, on the ache. When your heart has made a habit of reaching, it takes time to teach it how to rest. But that rest is where your power is. The romantic must become a witness, not because they've lost the ability to feel, but because they've learned how to feel without drowning. They've learned to be present without expecting anyone to carry them. They've learned to love without losing themselves. And in that transformation, they don't become less emotional. They become wise. They see clearly now. Not every spark is sacred, not every connection is meant to stay, and not every desire deserves to be fulfilled. Some are meant to be observed, understood, and released. That's not sadness. That's evolution. And once you've made that shift, you never love the same way again. You love quieter, but deeper. You love slower, but truer. And for the first time, you are free even in the middle of longing. Maybe love was never meant to complete you. Maybe it was meant to crack you open, to show you the places where you were still asleep, to drag you, kicking and bleeding, into a confrontation with the truth that no one can rescue you from yourself. And maybe that's not a tragedy. Maybe that's the beginning of becoming whole. Because what if your heartbreak wasn't the end of your story, but the beginning of your awakening? What if the loneliness, the disappointment, the longing weren't signs of failure, but invitations to return to yourself? Every time you broke was a moment the illusion shattered. And in the silence that followed, something real had a chance to speak. Not the voice that begs to be chosen, but the quieter one. The one that says, "You were always enough," even when they couldn't see it. That's the strange power of the romantic. Not in how deeply they long, but in how fiercely they survive their longing. Not in how much they give, but in how bravely they learn to give without losing themselves. You don't have to stop loving. You just have to stop expecting love to be your oxygen. Let it be something you breathe, not something you depend on. Let it be presence, not possession. Let it wake you up. And if this spoke to you, if it made you feel seen, even for a moment, don't disappear. Like, subscribe. Let's go into this journey together. And tell me, what has love taught you about suffering? Because your story matters. It might just be the mirror someone else is searching for.